Alrighty, you want to self-edit your book. Maybe you're strapped for cash or your editor is ready to strangle you because you haven't taken the time to actually put the work in. Well, good news. The gang over at ProWritingAid decided to lend me the head of learning there. Her name's Hayley. We're going to be talking to her in today's episode, so make sure that you stay tuned. What's happening? It's Dale here with Self-Publishing with Dale. I'm just tickled to death that you took a little bit of time out your day to spend a little bit of time with me to talk about my favorite thing in writing and self-publishing. More importantly, we are going to be talking about self-editing today. And so, are you self-editing a book? Then find out how to improve clarity, grammar, and style in today's video. And speaking of style, you gotta have style by actually getting my preferred software in ProWritingAid. Get free access or 20% off premium access when you visit the sponsored link at dalelinks.com/ProWritingAid. So I did bring on today's guest. Her name is Hayley Milliman. She's the head of learning at ProWritingAid. And prior to joining the team, Hayley spent several years as an elementary school teacher and curriculum developer in Memphis, Tennessee. When Hayley isn't hunched over her keyboard, you can find her figure skating at the ice rink or hiking with her dog. So now we're going to welcome to the show Hayley Milliman. Hayley, how you feeling?
I am feeling great, Dale. Thank you so much for having me. So excited to nerd out with you guys a little bit on self-editing for the next hour or so.
You just said my favorite word, nerd out.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about, baby. Okay,
Awesome.
So I just want to let you know, as well as everybody else know, we are aggregating out to 9 different platforms today. So to say I'm a little bit stressed and a little nervous, I am, but thankfully Hayley's going to go ahead and take a lot of the workload. So those of you that are watching inside live chat, do me a huge favor. Could you tell me where you're watching from, and do you currently use ProWritingAid? If not, what's wrong with you? Totally kidding. See, you said no pressure, and here I am pressuring them. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just so nervous right now. So in any event, I just want to let everybody know that if you do have questions and comments, please drop them from wherever you're watching for Hayley, because Hayley's going to be kind of taking a nice little deep dive into self-editing. So in any event, without me bloviating any further, Hayley, I believe the floor is yours.
All right. Awesome, Dale. Well, as you said, we're going to dive into some techniques for self-editing today. These techniques are all going to be related to ProWritingAid, so I'm going to talk you through the techniques, how to use them on ProWritingAid. But for those of you who don't quite have our software yet, do not worry. Every single thing I teach you, you can use yourself, whether or not you have our software. But let's just go ahead and dive in. And there will be plenty of time for questions at the end, so please keep them coming. I am happy to answer as we go. All right. Or at the end and as we go, either way. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about 5 tips for clarity, grammar, and style when you are self-editing. And I hope that by the end of this presentation, I can prove to you that you can be just as good of an editor for your book as kind of working with a professional editor, right? So you can really get to your manuscript, you can make a lot of really effective changes to it so that when you do work with a human editor, you can focus more on kind of ideas than these really crafty, nerdy kind of language pieces. Okay. So by the end of this session, you will be able to explain why clarity is an important goal for writers. I actually think, spoiler alert, it is the most important goal for all writers. And you're also going to be able to make your writing more clear using 5 key principles. Let's just go ahead and dive in. So, like I said, clarity is an essential part of storytelling. That's because if your writing isn't clear, you will not engage readers. I do not care if you've spent hours and hours developing the best plot in the world, if you have characters who are unique and engaging. If your writing's not clear, your readers will not care. They will not be able to engage with those ideas. So it's incredibly important for us to focus on craft and to focus on how we use language and how we edit our language so that those ideas that you've spent hours and hours and hours thinking about in the shower, dreaming about, so that those are available for your readers to engage with. And again, if we don't focus on our language and focus on clarity, those ideas will not shine. So what do I mean when I talk about clarity? First, how easy your writing is to understand. Can your readers read a sentence and understand what you're talking about? Second, whether or not you as the writer have set up your sentences in a way that make them easy for your readers to interpret. Again, our goal here is ideas. We want our ideas to shine, and we want our language to be the vehicle for those ideas. We don't want to hide those ideas behind complicated or convoluted sentence structures or sentence style and that type of thing. Now, I am not talking about, when I talk about clarity, how simple or juvenile your ideas are. This is something that I hear a lot. I'll talk about clarity and readability, and people will get super nervous. They'll be like, Hayley, I'm writing for adults. I don't need to have like simple ideas. My people can handle complicated thoughts, which is very true. If you are writing for adults, you can definitely have complicated, mature ideas, but you should still use clear language to convey those, okay? Actually, I would say that in most instances, it's more important to have clear language when you're communicating complicated ideas, so that way your readers know exactly what you mean and they're not confused by it, okay? So clarity has nothing to do with the content of your ideas. It also has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not your prose is engaging and exciting. It's another thing we hear all the time working with an editing software, that people are like, oh my God, I'm going to put it in this program and it's going to take away my voice. It's going to take away all the like things that make me unique, which could not be further from the truth. Clarity prioritizes your voice, prioritizes how you communicate things, and actually makes your ideas, again, more engaging and exciting rather than less. Clarity is important because as our writers, our main job is to get our meaning across clearly and effectively. As I've mentioned a couple times, if our writing is too complicated or hard to follow, we are not doing our job. We need to prioritize ideas over showing off our fancy vocabulary and how we've mastered different sentence structures. If we have unclear writing, our readers are going to spend more time trying to figure out what we're saying, or, jumping over to the dictionary to figure out what that word means, than actually engaging with our ideas. And that means that we're just not going to have readers who are as engaged and are as into what we're writing. The clearer we are, the more our readers are going to care about what we're writing and want to come back for more. So here at ProWritingAid, we believe that writing should be clear and easy to understand, constructed with your reader in mind. And I'll come back to this a little bit later in the presentation. And it should also be full of rich words and sentence structures that add to their engagement. We don't want to be using the same words and the same phrases, all of us. We want to be using differentiated words, differentiated sentence structures, but those all have to be utilized with who our reader is and what we're trying to get across in mind. And as I've said, writing should not be so convoluted that our readers can't understand what we're saying, or full of fancy or impressive words that obfuscate your meaning. That is a good example of one. I did not need to say obfuscate. I could have just said hide. But you don't need to have fancy or impressive words just to sound smart. Again, the goal is ideas, not fancy language. And just like that, good writing prioritizes our ideas over fancy, confusing language. Hopefully at this point, I have convinced you. You're like, Hayley, I'm all in on clarity. How do we do it? So I want you to think about every sentence that you write as a movie that your readers play in their head. If you are not clear about the actors and actions in that movie, it will be wrong, right? So if I say something really complicated, like, I can't come up with something complicated on the spot, but if I say something simple, right, like Hayley sits on the couch, that's a clear movie. However, if I'm adding complicated language or sentence structures into it, the movie might be different. Dale and I might be playing a different movie in our head, right? So our goal as the writer is to make sure that the movie that our readers are playing is as clear and as engaging as possible. We start at the sentence level because when we have clear sentences, then we can have clear paragraphs, and then we can have clear stories. If we reverse that, we'll never get a clear story if we don't have clear sentences. So we have to look sentence by sentence to make sure our sentences are set up in a way that's clear and easy to interpret. So that way our stories can be clear and easy to interpret. All right. So sentences are where clarity starts. Clarity is incredibly important to communicate our ideas. How do we write clear sentences? Let's get into it. There are 5 principles that we focus on when creating clear, engaging sentences. These all relate to clarity, grammar, and style. So our first one is to make subjects and verbs the big actors and actions of our text. Our second is to eliminate unnecessary words from our writing. Our third is to watch a readability score. Our fourth is to use specific words. And our fifth is to reduce hidden verbs. I'm going to go into each of these in detail. I'm also going to show you how they work with ProWritingAid, as I mentioned at the beginning. That being said, do not stress if you don't have ProWritingAid or if you don't want to try it, it's all good. Every single thing I'm going to show you is something that you can do yourself as well, okay? So let's dive into principle number one. Principle number one, to make your subjects and verbs the big actors and actions of your text. So the problem in here is unclear subjects. If you have written a sentence with passive voice, that means that you've put the object of your sentence before the subject. When you construct a sentence with passive voice, you don't find out who's performing that main action until you get to the end of the sentence, and in some instances, you might not find out at all. Here's what that type of sentence looks like. The present was opened by Jane. So in this example, Jane is the doer. She's the subject of the sentence. She's the one performing the action, but she isn't introduced until the very end of the sentence. Now, in this super, super simple sentence, it's not going to really get in the way of our reader's understanding, right? So if you think about that kind of idea of the movie, if we go back to this sentence, the present was opened by Jane. If I read this super, super slowly, like the present was opened by Jane, you would kind of close your eyes and the present would pop in at first and then Jane would pop in at the very end, right? So you can see how in a simple structure that doesn't really affect anything, but when it becomes a more complicated structure, that movie that your reader is playing in their minds can get a little muddled or can become unclear. So again, in these simple constructions, passive voice is probably not going to get in the way of your reader's understanding. But when your sentence becomes more complicated or when understanding the subject is important, passive voice can be dangerous. Now, this happens a lot actually in newspaper headings where people will say like, person murdered in their home or something like that, which is technically a passive construction because you don't know who the murderer is or you don't know who the perpetrator of that crime is. And so in instances like that, when you hide the subject, it can create a lot of different meaning and leave things open to interpretation in a way that can be dangerous or can lead people to have wildly different experiences of something. Now, newspapers do that because they want you to like click in and read, and they're trying to capitalize on that like fear or that like uncertainty that passive voice in that instance creates. So they're doing it for a reason. But that's one of the things I like to think about when I think about like how passive voice can be troublesome, right? Like if I read a headline that says person murdered in their home, I probably have a different picture of what that would be than Dale does, right? So when you have passive constructions where your subject is hidden, again, that leaves your sentences open to interpretation in a way that can become problematic. So passive voice is bad because it hides the subject, it hides that main actor and puts them somewhere that you don't necessarily recognize them. It can also make your sentences overly wordy and complicated. When we're focusing on clarity, our goal is always to make our sentences as clear and as simple as possible. And saying the present was opened by Jane, for instance, is longer than Jane opened the present. So we're always kind of going for clarity and brevity when we can and when it makes sense. And then it also takes power away from your subject, right? And it puts it with the object. And we always, as much as possible, want to focus on having our subjects being the strong actors and the main actors in our sentences. Now, passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. So if you're using your word processor or you're using Microsoft Word's spelling and grammar check, it's not going to flag passive voice because it's grammatically correct. But it should be used sparingly. So if you need to use this sentence structure, it's okay, but you need to use it sparingly. And that's kind of the whole through line of this presentation. I want you to be thoughtful about when you're employing these different pieces, right? So you might decide that passive voice is okay. We're going to talk about when that would be in a second, but I want you to come into it thinking and making that kind of conscious choice that passive voice is okay and that you're choosing to use it in a specific situation rather than like letting it happen to you as a bad habit. That's the goal here. Okay, so when should you use it? I recommend using it if the subject of your sentence is unknown. So, the Stonehenge was built in whatever BC. We don't know who, right? So the subject is unknown. It's okay to use passive voice at that point because we don't know. The subject can't have power or agency in that sentence because the subject is not known. You can also use passive voice if the subject of your sentence is irrelevant. So say you're writing something about the history of New York City or, and you're talking about the construction of the Time and Life building. You say, the Time and Life building was constructed in 1947 or whatever it was. In that case, if it's really not relevant to the sentence, it's fine to use passive voice, okay? And you can also use passive voice if you want to be deliberately vague about responsibility. So this is like those newspaper headlines I was talking about before. Lots of times newspapers use passive voice because they want to get you to click and open their article and engage with their content. In that case, it's okay. If you're writing a murder mystery or something like that, and a bag of something terrible was left on the stoop, and your main character doesn't know what it is or doesn't know who left it, it's okay to use passive voice in that instance. But again, the goal here is to help you figure out when to use it most effectively, and not to just kind of have it happen to you as a bad habit. All right. So if you have this bad habit, what do you do? So the ways to fix passive voice are first to look for places where you've used the word by. The word by is usually an indicator that your sentence is constructed with passive voice. So the present was opened by Jane. That by is an indication that there's the passive voice. Okay. So looking for, doing a simple search through your chapter that you're editing or whatever, your page, and looking for places where you've used the word by, that can indicate that you've used passive voice. You can also look for places where you've used to be plus verb construction. So was opened. It's another good indication that you've used passive voice. Once you've found that instance, you just want to swap your sentence around so whoever is performing the action comes at the beginning. So we had the present was opened by Jane. She's the one doing the action. We've just got to put her at the beginning so she's closer to the verb. She's the one performing the action. It's a pretty simple fix. And then, of course, if you have ProWritingAid, you can fix it with that. So ProWritingAid's style report, as well as our real-time checker, identify instances of passive voice just like we have here. So you can see, like I was talking about before, we've got our to be verb, we've got the word by, but ProWritingAid makes it super easy to find a place where you've used that passive voice. In certain instances, it might suggest a correction, but obviously context matters. So in other instances, it might just notify you that there is an instance of passive voice, at which point you can reconstruct your sentence using the tips we just talked about to make it in the active voice. We also have within the tool, this little orange button takes you to articles about the suggestion, as well as videos, and in some instances quizzes. So if you're ever not sure about something or whether it's right for that context, you can use that video and that article to decide, should I make this edit or should I not? It's something I'm going to hammer home kind of throughout this presentation. All of the suggestions from ProWritingAid are suggestions. You do not have to accept any of them. We want you to retain agency over your writing and be the one who decides, okay, I'm going to fix this or I'm not. All right, that was number one. Moving into number two, eliminate unnecessary words from your writing. This is my favorite one. So there are two types of words in every sentence. The first type are working words, and the second type are glue words. Working words are the words in your sentence that convey meaning and contain the sentence's most essential information. Think your subjects, your verbs, adjectives, that type of thing. Glue words are the words that make the essential pieces of the sentence stick together. They are necessary, but you can change them out and rearrange them, and the sentence will still make sense. So, for instance, if I said Hayley sat on the couch, Hayley is a working word because I can't change out Hayley for Dale or for somebody else because the sentence's meaning would change, right? So working words are those words that are essential to the meaning of the sentence. Glue words are the other words that are in there that make the sentence make sense, but you can, again, change them or switch them out, and things would change. So glue words typically are the 200 or so most common words in the English language. So think about like your prepositions, your articles, those types of words that, again, make the sentence stick together, but we can change them in or out to make the sentence, to shorten the sentence, to make the sentence more to the point, to make the sentence longer, and the sentence really wouldn't change too much. As I've mentioned, both of these are necessary for your sentence, but if you start to have too many glue words, your sentence will be unnecessarily clunky and long. Now at ProWritingAid, we talk about something called a glue index. A glue index is the percentage of your sentence that's made up of those kind of sticky words, those glue words. We recommend that you aim for a glue percentage of 40%. So that means in your sentences, about 40% are these kind of stick together words, and 60% are the words that convey the meaning, right? Your subjects, your verbs, your adjectives, that type of thing. Now, this is an average for your document. You want to average around 40%. That means that some sentences might have 50-50, some might have 60-40 in the other way. But overall, your goal is to have about 40% glue words in your document with 60% working. Let's take a look at what this means a little bit. So in this sentence, Dave walked over into the backyard of the school in order to see if there was a new bicycle that he could use in his class. This sentence has a glue percentage of 60%. So it has too many glue words and not enough working words. Dale, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think are some of the working words, so some of the essential words in this sentence that I couldn't change?
Boy, you put me on the spot.
I know. I'm like, you're doing some other stuff, but you're here. So.
I'm sitting there managing chat and such like that.
No, it's all good. So working words, again, words that convey the essential information. Even if you just want to do a couple, what could I not change without changing the meaning?
Dave walked over into the backyard. We can get rid of over. That seems like a little bit of an extra word we've tossed into there.
Yep. What could we not get rid of? Just give me one or two.
We obviously clearly need to use walked. I'm missing out on this.
No, it's okay. That's fine. It's all good. I'm putting you on the spot without telling you.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I'll go ahead. So we've got walked. Sorry. We've got walked, which is one of the essential ones, right? So if I switched walked to ran, right, that would change the meaning of the sentence. If I switched walked to like hopped, that would change the meaning. If I switched Dave for Dale, for Hayley, anything like that, all of that would change the meaning of the sentence, right? So the words that I've highlighted here are my working words. They're the words that have the essential meaning. Just like Dale was saying, we can't change those words out without changing the meaning of the sentence. And like Dale said, we can change words like over or into because those are just kind of like giving us directions, but we can combine them, we can switch them out, we can rewrite the sentence. And as long as we've got this core information that Dale's going to the school for the new bicycle for class, like, the sentence will have that same meaning, right? The movie will still be correct. So when we're thinking about a sentence like this, we want to make sure that our working words are prioritized over these glue words, right? These glue words that are not highlighted that hold the sentence together. We want to make sure that we have our working words prioritized, which again are the words that we cannot change without changing the meaning of the sentence. So say you have a sentence like this, where we've got 60% glue words, 60% glue words and 40% working. How do we change it? Now, this is where it's important to remember that there are multiple ways to change this, and that all of these principles are applicable to you no matter kind of what your writing style is, and no matter what your goal is, and no matter what your voice is, because there's not one way to fix a sticky sentence. So I'm not going to put Dale on the spot again, but if I did and had him rewrite that, he would come up with a totally different sentence than I would. And then everybody watching this would also come up with a totally different sentence. I've done this presentation and talked about this a couple of different times, and every single time, every writer has a totally different way of rewriting the sentence, which is so important. And it's great because we can all kind of retain our voice when fixing a sticky sentence. So there's not one way to fix it. What you need to do is look at your sentence, find your working words. So find those words like Dave and walked and bicycle or whatever they are, and think about how you can keep that same messaging with less words, right? So this is how I did it. I said Dave checked the schoolyard for a new bicycle to use in class. This brings my glue percentage down to 38%. And we've got fewer of those glue words kind of holding the sentence together. Now, again, everyone watching this could rewrite it in a completely different way. But again, as long as that idea, that main kind of nugget of the movie, that Dave is going to the schoolyard for a bicycle, remains the same, that's all okay. Okay. So the cool thing about glue words is that when we fix these sticky sentences, you can all do it in different ways to make the sentence more effective. And again, you can do that in your own voice so that you're not sounding exactly like a robot who's doing, who are all writing things in the same way. So I'm going to show you how to do this with ProWritingAid. We make it very simple. But if you don't have ProWritingAid, the way to fix sticky sentences are first to look for sentences that are overly long. Typically, if a sentence is over 18 or so words, that's a good indication that it's chock full of some glue words that you can eliminate or rewrite. So first, look for places where your sentences are overly long. You don't have to count every single word of every single sentence. That would be a waste of time. But look for places when you're reading back through your editing where you're like, this, I've got a lot of conjunctions in here, or, the sentence is going on for a long time. Or if I was reading this out loud, I would run out of breath, right? So look for sentences that are overly long. Again, 18 words is kind of like the number that you would apply to that, but you can use your judgment. You'll also want to look for sentences that have lots of prepositions. Again, if we went back to that slide on the glue words, a lot of those are prepositions and articles and that type of thing. Those are typically sticky words. And then finally, places where you've used conjunctions, because conjunctions themselves can be glue words, and also the sentences that are joined by a lot of conjunctions are typically too long and are things that you can kind of cut down. Remember, it's about your percentage. So it's not a specific number, it's about the percentage of the whole. Now, if you're using ProWritingAid, again, we make it super easy because we have a sticky sentences report. So our sticky sentences report goes in and it identifies all of the writing in your document that has this mismatched glue percentage, right? So first you get your overall document glue index. So this document has 46%, so it's a little higher than our target of 40. And then we highlight sticky sentences, which in our software are places that are like 60% or higher. So these are probably places that you really want to fix right away. And then we have semi-sticky sentences, which are kind of in that neighborhood between 40 and 60%, where you might want to pay some attention to them, but you could read them back and decide, you know what, it's actually fine. But we basically highlight the sentences for you. And then as you hover over, you can see exactly what your glue words were. So you know where to go and what to remove when you're rewriting the sentence. Again, you'll see here that we don't recommend a rewrite. We just tell you what the sticky words are. So that way you can rewrite the sentence in a way that makes sense for you and for your voice and what you're talking about. All of that type of stuff. All right, moving right along to principle 3. So we talked about passive voice, we talked about glue words. Our third principle is to check your readability score. Now, inexperienced authors and experienced authors often make their writing too difficult to read. And as we've kind of talked about, the most effective writers make their work easier to read, not harder. Good writing has accessible language, accessible sentence structure, which makes it more engaging. So most adults actually prefer their books to be easy to read. So 7th grade is the appropriate kind of age range for most mass market fiction books. So think your like Da Vinci Codes, like things that people are reading, they want to read at a 7th grade level. And that doesn't, of course, mean that like, I can't read something that's more complicated than 7th grade. But when I'm thinking about like fiction that I just want to enjoy, I don't necessarily want to sit there with my dictionary. So this is a really, really common misconception that we have to be writing for the age of our readers, when in actuality, the language that we should use should be much lower in most instances. It's similar for news sites. It's similar for blogs. 7th to 8th grade is kind of the across the board like language that we're writing at. So in theory, that means that the writing could be understood by a 7th or 8th grader in terms of how it's constructed with language, style, grammar, and that type of thing. So again, our goal here is to make the language easier so that the ideas can shine. So what that means, right? So when you say something is readable by a 7th grader or a 7th grade reading level, first, it means that your prose is clear and easy to follow. So you want to make sure that somebody reading your book can understand what you're talking about and follow your ideas. The next thing is that you want to use what I like to call special word chips effectively. This can be a little brief detour back to my days as a teacher. So when I was a teacher and starting as a curriculum developer, I had to write a lot of assessments. And because I was doing that for elementary school, I had to be very, very careful that the readability score for my documents was appropriate. So if I was writing something for a 5th grader, it couldn't be like as complicated I couldn't have a 7th grade readability because they were 10, right? Like they literally have not gotten to that grade level yet. So I had to be really, really, really careful about my word choice and my sentence structure to make sure that I was at that 5th grade level. Now, that was challenging because I would have to work in specific terms. So if I was writing a science assessment, for example, I might have to work in the word biodiversity because that's what we were learning about. But I couldn't have the rest of the sentence be really complicated, like the word biodiversity, because then it would be too high. So what I had to do was make sure that I used the term biodiversity, but that the rest of the sentence was simple around it. And that's kind of the principle of special word chips. Like, you can use special words like biodiversity or whatever they are for your writing, but you don't want every single word to be super complicated, right? So before, when I used obfuscate, it's probably unnecessary. It didn't add anything to meaning, but you can use complicated words. You just have to make sure you're using them at a point where it makes sense. So if you're a sci-fi writer or something like that, and you want to talk about a complicated intergalactic battle or something, use words that relate to that, but use them where they matter. Use them when you're describing the intergalactic politics or whatever it is. Don't just use them in sentences where you're talking about like what people ate at the mess hall, right? Use the word chips, the special word chips, at places where they will contribute to your audience's understanding and enjoyment, not just all over the place to show off your vocabulary. Okay. You also want to make sure that your ideas are the stars of your writing. Again, like we've talked about at multiple points, ideas are the key piece here. That is what we should be focusing on. And then finally, it means that you've taken your audience's understanding into account, right? So if we go back to those special word chips, the special kind of word chips for a sci-fi audience would be different than a romance audience, or different than a history audience, or different than a mystery audience, right? Because every audience is going to have a different background, a different understanding. So when you're thinking about which words, which sentence structures to use, think about who you're writing for. What will they understand? What will they be comfortable with, and use it on those things. Don't just, again, throw in special words just for the sake of it. Now, readability does not mean, on the other hand, that your prose is boring or uninspired, that you don't use any domain-specific or interesting words. Again, please use them. Just use them when they matter. And then most importantly, it does not mean your writing is dumbed down, and it does not mean your ideas are uncomplicated. So writing for 7th grade doesn't mean you have to, or writing at a 7th grade reading level does not mean you're writing for 7th graders, right? Writing at an 8th grade reading level does not mean you're writing for 8th graders. You can write very complicated, very adult, mature themes with sentences and words that could be read by a 7th grader. So again, the goal is to make sure that your writing is understood language and style and word choice wise, but not ideas wise. And I would actually argue that it's more important when you have complicated writing or complicated ideas to make your prose easier to understand. Because again, we want to make sure that our readers really understand what we mean, right? And if you're working through adult themes, you're working through complicated subject material, you want to make sure the language does that justice, and that the language conveys exactly what you're trying to say and is not open to misinterpretation. Okay, so how do you check it? A readability score is basically a measure of how easy your text is to read. It measures factors like sentence length and word familiarity to basically just give you a score that tells you what grade level of reader will understand your writing. There's tons of different kinds. They are, like the Flesch formula. Flesch Kincaid is super popular. Dale Shaw, Gunning Fogg, all of these, they basically all present information in the different ways, but they all tell you the same thing, like who could read this. The awesome thing about this is that readability scores are in most word processors. I found this out as a kid when I was trying to write high school, like essays for high school. And I was always trying to do exactly the opposite of what I'm telling you now and sound as smart as I possibly could. And I was like, I got to get to like 12.8 as my grade level, because that means I'm going to get an A, which is not true. So don't do what I did before. But you can find, moral of that story is that you can find your readability score almost everywhere. There's also a ton of free readability calculators out there, but you might run into some word count limits, which can be challenging. And again, your goal for most fiction is to be around that 7th to 8th grade reading level. If you're above that, some questions to ask yourself first are, am I using an easy to understand vocabulary? Are my sentences short and to the point? This kind of ties back to the sticky sentences. If you're getting above that like 18 word range, it's probably too long. Are you, using too much jargon? Are you writing in the active voice? So again, passive voice sentence constructions are more complicated than active voice, like we talked about before. You want to make sure you're getting directly to your point without wandering around too much. And again, can you trim those extra glue words from your sentences? So these are key points to do for how to kind of edit your work if you have a readability score higher than what your goal is. Now, I do want to say that 7th to 8th grade is like mass market kind of readability score, but if you're writing for an academic audience, or again, you're writing in a very specific domain, you might be higher than that, right? So if you're writing a master's paper, it's probably going to be higher than 7th to 8th grade, and that's fine. This goal is it's dependent on your audience and what you're trying to get across. Okay, and ProWritingAid can help you, as you probably have figured out by now, with our readability report, which gives you an overall document score. So it gives you an overall document readability score, but then it also really helpfully highlights difficult and slightly difficult to read paragraphs, so you can figure out where you want to spend your time. So if you're like, hey, my overall document is good, but this one paragraph is really, really difficult, you can go there and start to make edits to that. Or if you're like the opposite, my whole document is really hard to read, but a couple paragraphs here and there are fine, then you can go through and again, focus your energy on the places that make it more difficult. Our style report also gives you a lot of suggestions for readability enhancements, where you can come in and again, make edits to your writing to make it more readable. So the readability kind of gives you a overall look at your document, and the style check will come in and give you different readability enhancements to kind of, practically speaking, put that into effect. Okay, specific words, principle 4. This is getting a little bit more fun. So we've talked a lot about like cutting things out, making things simple. Now, when we're going back into specific words, I want to kind of infuse the personality back into it. So when I'm talking about clarity, one of the key pieces is to make your writing simple, but it's also to be specific, right? So when we're too vague, our sentences will lack the clarity that your readers want to think, and if you think back to that kind of movie idea, if your movie is not clear, your readers are going to have a different perspective. So for instance, if you describe your protagonist as a tall girl, that's subjective. Tall means something completely different to a short person than it does to a tall person. I, for instance, am very, very short. So literally everyone is tall to me. And again, what I conceptualize as tall is going to be very different than my brother, who's like almost 6 feet tall. And for him, nobody's tall. So you need to use specific words and phrases to paint that kind of vivid picture to make that movie accurate. A lot of words like more, poor, excellent, large, better, these are all ambiguous. What I understand as excellent might be very different than what Dale understands as excellent. And again, it's going to contribute to a negative experience for our readers because that movie that they're playing in their head is not going to be correct. Now, if we look at these two sentences, so if you take the first one, Kate made some improvements to her cabin and it's now worth more. That sentence is super vague. Okay, some improvements can mean anything. I am not handy at all, so making some improvements could be like vacuuming, whereas to my mom, who's an architect, making some improvements probably means like redesigning the bathroom, right? So some improvements there is super open to interpretation. Similarly, so is worth more. Worth more could be $200, it could be 20,000. So when we have vague sentences like this, again, that movie that our readers are playing in their head gets a little bit muddled. So you could fix this by saying, Kate replaced the bathroom suite, repainted the living room, and laid hardwood floors in her cabin. As a result, its value has increased by 10%. This second example is much more specific, and the picture that movie our readers are playing is more specific as well. I always like to pause here because if we look at our sentences, this sentence is longer, right? This sentence is much longer. It's over double as long as this first one was. And I want to highlight this because clarity does not always mean just cutting things out, right? Clarity means being specific, being brief when it makes sense, but also like using those specific words. So if we look at this second sentence, it's okay that it's longer because it doesn't have a lot of glue words, right? Like every word is essential to the meaning of that sentence. Whereas this top sentence, there's a lot of glue words, even though it's shorter, right? So it's not always just like short is good, long is bad. It's a combination of both. And so you have to be thinking about both things when you're editing your writing in order to make it as effective as possible. Again, clarity does not always equal brevity. The goal is to think about what is that idea that I want to convey? What is that movie I want my readers to play? And make sure that it is clear for them, and that it's specific for them. As you probably guessed, ProWritingAid can help you with this. Our diction report, and I'll keep moving, can help us find vague and abstract words so that you can fix them and replace them with more specific options. We also have a contextual thesaurus, which is really helpful. So if you're finding places where you've used vague words or where you just want to like highlight some better words or choose something more interesting, the contextual thesaurus will offer suggestions and offer replacements, but it takes into context what your sentence is about. So it gives you recommendations that are relevant, again, to the context of your sentence, which can be super helpful. All right, and our final principle is to replace hidden verbs. So verbs are the action words in our writing. They keep the story moving forward. They keep our readers engaging with the action in our story. Now, something that's pretty common in a lot of writers is the process called nominalization, which is when you take a verb and you turn it into a noun and you add a weak verb in its place. I know that sounds really complicated, so I'm going to show you what I mean by that. These hidden verbs, which I'll show you in a second, tend to kind of corrupt or slow the action. So for instance, if instead of saying, I'm going to discuss this on Friday, I say, I'm going to hold a discussion on Friday, changing discuss into hold a discussion is that process of nominalization. I'm taking the power out of my verb, discuss, and I'm hiding it behind this kind of complicated verb phrase, hold a discussion. And again, when we have this, it slows the action, it kind of increases our readability, and it just takes that power away from our verbs. So here's an example, instead of saying we will announce the winner on Friday, we will make an announcement of the winner on Friday. When you, again, add that kind of weak verb, make, and then turn the strong verb into a noun, announcement, you're taking away the power. You're sounding less certain. The second example where we have just the powerful verb, announce the winner, it's shorter, clearer, and stronger. Some common examples are instead of saying, I'm going to analyze this, I will perform an analysis, I will perform a review, I will offer an explanation. A lot of these are really common in work situations. If you feel a little bit nervous about something and, I'm going to make an announcement on Friday or whatever it is, I'm going to make an announcement about my news, whatever it is, this type of language is very common for people, again, who are trying to kind of hide the power from their verbs and take that away. If you're looking for these, or if you think that it's common in your writing, it's very common in mine. You can look for endings like ment, tion, ance. Those are a good indication that you've used a hidden verb. And beware of weak verbs like give, have, that type of thing. You might want to use these if you have, official stiff sounding wording, or you're trying to define a character's voice or something like that. But overall, you want to find these and typically go with the stronger verb rather than this more complicated construction. Okay, and obviously ProWritingAid can help you with that. So our style report finds instances where you've used hidden verbs and can help you fix those and again, put the power back into your verbs. All right. So I'm going to just dive into a couple other quick ProWritingAid features, and then we will turn it over for questions. So a couple of my other kind of bad habits are echoes. When I am writing fiction, especially, I get something stuck in my head. I will describe someone as with turquoise eyes like 500 times in a chapter. It gets really boring. So the echoes report and the repeats report will come in and find places where you've used close repeats. The repeats report finds all of your repeated 1, 4, 3 word phrases. So you can figure out, am I saying, beautiful turquoise eyes 500 times? I also use the length report to find places where I've gone too long, as well as when I'm writing for business situations, or if I'm blogging or something like that, I take a look at the cliches and then our jargon report as well, just to make sure that I haven't put anything in there that couldn't be understood by a wide audience. Another just really cool feature that I like to brag about because I worked on it a lot is that we've developed a summary report that gives you goals for your document. So it gives you kind of an overall place where you can see, hey, here's the places where it looks great, and here's the places where it might need work. You can see these little sliding bands, which is kind of where you should be. And then you can see with your little dot where you are outside or inside that band. Again, you'll notice all of these are ranges because ranges are good. You don't have to be exactly at 40%. You can be, or, exactly at 11 words, you can be within this range. So this is almost always the first thing that I run. I come in here and I say, okay, where am I really messing up? So that way I can make those changes. It's just a helpful kind of overview of the program or of your writing. And then another fun feature is that we let you change who you compare your document to. So you can actually set an author. So I have mine at Margaret Atwood, but you could pick like Tolkien, you can pick just tons and tons of different authors and compare your writing to theirs. So you can see how many times do I use terrible adverbs versus Margaret Atwood. Clearly much more than her, which is why she is a canonized famous author and I am not at this point. But again, it's just a fun feature where you can say, hey, how does my sentences or how do my usage of certain things look compared to another author, which is just fun and useful. All right. We zipped through a lot of things today, but basically we talked about why clarity is so important for your reader, what that means, and then we talked about 5 different ways to improve your clarity. First being to eliminate passive voice, second being to eliminate those glue words, to check your readability score, to use specific language, and then finally to reduce those hidden verbs. If you self-edit your book with these, I promise you that whether you're editing it yourself and then sending it out to people, or whether you're editing and then bringing in a human editor to help you with your ideas, your writing will be clearer and more engaging for your readers. All right, questions. I think it's that time.
All righty, very, very good. Questions, comments, concerns. I do have a couple of them that we picked up along the way. It's so funny because everybody doesn't see me. I told you before we went live, I was like, everybody's going to see me, but I actually ended up shutting my screen off. So you're seeing me work in the background, and you're like, I want to see if I can make him panic.
I was like, he looks like he's paying attention. That's great.
So let me scroll back. There was a few of them, and unfortunately, the context might get lost at some point because of the longer broadcast here. Folks, load her up with questions. She is here. All right. So the very first one was drawing base. The question was, how do we use this in a personal development book?
That's a great question. So ProWritingAid, you can edit your writing style, which is really helpful. So you can come in and you can switch the writing style for this. If it's personal development, I would say that you're probably going with like general or potentially casual, depending on like the style of your like how you're talking and that type of thing. But pretty much all of these principles apply, right? So glue words and eliminating sticky sentences applies no matter if you're writing fiction or if you're writing something else, a personal development book, if you're writing memoir, if you're working on an academic paper, it's applicable for all of these. This is a fiction sample, but I have a number of other different samples. And basically what we do is we just switch the style, and it gives slightly different kind of ranges for each of those things. So you'll see slightly different ranges on that summary report I showed you, as well as slightly different recommendations. For instance, in a general or a business article, we might not have recommendations on dialogue or something like that because there's probably not dialogue there is the same way in the fiction article. But typically, again, the same principles are going to apply, which is that you want to use active language. You want to eliminate, extra words. You want your work to be readable. Again, readability is a sliding scale. It depends who you're writing for. So if your personal development audience is personal development at a college, it might be higher than if it's just mass market personal development. But again, almost all the same principles will apply.
Awesome. Zuki asked this one. I answered, but I'm going to have you answer it live anyways. Is ProWritingAid free?
Yes. So we have a forever free option, which is editing up to 500 words. You can also use our Chrome extension, which lets you edit where you write in, Facebook, WordPress, Gmail, all that type of stuff. So that is forever free. Up to 500 words is free as well. Then if you decide that you want to edit more than 500 words at a time, or if you want to use our integrations for Microsoft Word or a desktop app or anything like that, we have a monthly, a yearly, and a lifetime subscription.
Awesome.
That you can get 20% off at with dalelinks.com/ProWritingAid.
You knew it. Yes, exactly. You're taking notes.
Yes.
Kelly D, I tell you, it was almost like you knew. You've done this presentation a couple times. Kelly D said, but don't short sentences make the story boring and disrupt the flow?
Yes. And so, Kelly, great question. I think, again, it's all about context, right? So sometimes you will have a bunch of short sentences. Sometimes you'll have longer ones. We have a pacing report, which I didn't show you guys, but it goes through and it finds places where you have slower paced paragraphs. That's fine. Sometimes if you're describing something, if you're setting the scene, slow pacing is okay, right? That's fine. But again, it helps you identify those places so you can decide, oh, like I did not mean for this to be slow. Like this is an action scene. I meant for it to move quickly. And then you can make changes. And then similarly, that sentence length, like it is a range, right? It's 11 to 18 words is our recommendation. That doesn't mean every single sentence has to be 11 or every single sentence has to be 18 or even that every single sentence has to be in there. Again, it's kind of like the averages that make for a more enjoyable experience, but obviously there's going to be some extremes on either end.
Awesome. Next question is same person, Kelly D asked, there's a lot of technical sciencey words in adult, I love sciencey,
yeah.
in adult sci-fi stories. Does this apply to sci-fi? And I think this was when you were talking about technical jargon and trying to keep it to not dumbed down, but down to that 7th grade reading levels where you were talking.
Yeah. Yeah, so totally, it totally does. And that's kind of those like special word chips I was talking about, Kelly, where like use the sciencey words because your audience is familiar with them, right? So if your audience is familiar with like schematics and other words that are related to sci-fi or whatever, use them. That's totally fine because your audience knows those. And again, readability is a sliding scale. What affects readability for a sci-fi audience is going to be different than a romance audience. Again, this gives you information about it so that you can choose whether or not like, hey, this word makes sense because my audience will get it or it doesn't. And then another thing that you can create a personal dictionary with ProWritingAid. So if you have some words that are not recognized by our algorithm for whatever reason, you can always just add them. So they kind of become part of your lexicon.
Awesome. Another question here. Joe D asked, I'm ready to sign up to the yearly plan. Is there a coupon code to apply? I can answer this one, Hayley. Yeah. You've handled a lot so far. You guys can just go over to dalelinks.com/ProWritingAid and there's automatically a 20% discount. There's no additional coupon codes. That is your coupon code. It's kind of like you're kind of coming in there going, I know Dale, and they'll let you in for 20% lower. So
we're like, we like Dale. Come on.
So, all right, let me scroll through here. If anybody else has any other questions, please fire away now. I've been using ProWritingAid for a while, but now I have a better grasp of passive voice and sticky words. Thanks. So
good. Glad to hear it.
Saw a few people here. Thank you. A lot of people saying they're going to give this a shot. You gave a lot of great information. And the funny thing is as you noticed, I was like madly going through 9 different places.
No.
And so naturally, I'm probably going to have to go back. I really liked a lot of the information that you gave about passive sentence structure. It's built in me. I really honestly, it's like, I feel like passive. So anytime I go with flow of thought, I just let it rip. So naturally, by the time the human editor gets it, she's kind of like, dude, really the passive sentences again? Like, I'm like,
yeah.
So, if there are no other questions, I see there's about roughly 40 people that are joining across all the channels. Thank you so much. Hayley, if you can come on back over to the regular, unless you have anything else to share.
No, that is it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Hayley, I do appreciate you taking a little time. And again, a real quick plug here, folks. You can go on over to dalelinks.com/ProWritingAid. If you want to get free access, just click the sign up. If you want to get the 20% off, you go ahead and click up the sign up button with that right there to get the premium access and 20% off. So in the meantime, I want to thank Hayley. Thank you so much for tuning in and helping us out tonight. This was actually really chock full of a lot of information, and it will be available for the replay. So Hayley, any last words before we get ready to disconnect?
No, thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope it was helpful. And if you have any questions, please email hello@prowritingaid.com and be like, Hayley told me this. I've got a question on it. I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. Very good. And of course, you know it's coming over towards the end screen. So if you're not watching this on YouTube, then chances are likely you're wondering what the heck this is. Right down in this next video below, we're going to actually do a ProWritingAid review. You're going to take a look at that. And that way you can kind of click on it and enjoy some of my insights and some of my